Good morning. It's really, first of all, Kimberly, I just want to say a very warm thank you for taking time coming all this way.
Oh my gosh, my thrill, yeah.
It was really fun when we were chatting with you on the ride up from LAX, how you resident Alaskans refer to this place down here. Do you want to share that?
I came to America. All Alaskans, whenever we're going anywhere, we just go, we're going to America. Yeah. Not that we're not proud Americans, but it's just easier to talk about that whole big place down there is America.
And can you see Russia from your house?
I don't have that view, although I do live in the same hometown as the woman who does have that view. So,
first of all, I also want to say thank you. Those in the crowd that know the Center for Economic Research and Forecasting, we sort of have a reputation based on our previous forecasts. And by talking about Washington, D.C., you've turned the economic outlook into this sunny, bright, uplifting thing.
I know.
Thank you for that service to our community.
I was your warm-up, yep.
So do you have any thoughts about the economic picture? Because I know you write about that quite a bit. And so do you have any thoughts about what are the issues at the moment, what we should be looking at?
So I'm actually really concerned about it still. If you listen to the White House, mission accomplished, game over. But I think that especially the latest round of numbers that we came out show that inflation remains incredibly high in some really key areas. There's a lot of people that are making the argument, you're probably going to maybe talk about this, that money supply has now been reduced enough that rapid disinflation is coming soon. I don't know if that's the case. I think this is going to be a little bit more troublesome to get its hand around, especially because, and this is where I'm going to bring in the Washington side of this. People focus a lot on the Fed, but one thing we learned from Reagan in the 80s is that what matters just as much is the supply side. And this White House has cared nothing for that. It's basically left the Fed to just get on with it, and we're going to make it worse, by the way. We're just going to keep throwing money out into the economy. And, they did it again just last year with the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act and the PACT Act. There were trillions more dollars spent last year in addition to regular budgetary items. Again.
Yeah, the CHIPS Act, which was bipartisan, which was approved by a significant number of
Republicans. Bipartisan corporate welfare. Yes, we all locked hands for bipartisan corporate welfare. Yeah. It's the one place Washington can always get along, spending.
So before we go to the audience and ask their questions, last night when you were spending time with our advisory board and with our sponsors, you commented that just seeing groups like ours, local groups, really gives you encouragement. And so I just want to give you a chance to sort of reinforce that. You said a little bit of that at the podium.
Oh, I totally mean it. I get asked, I have the fortune to get to talk to a lot of groups. And it's wonderful to get to speak to any environment, but by far the ones I love speaking to are state and local groups. Because, and I like to remind people of this, that's what's supposed to be our main piece of government. State and local, that's what the founders saw. I don't know if a lot of people know this. Up until the 1930s, federal taxes were never more than 5% of national income. And state budgets, state taxes were usually 2 to 3 times that amount because that was where all of your government was supposed to be, right? That was where they provided all your services, your education, and the federal government was really in the role of an empire and a few things like providing for national defense and interstate highways, okay? That is now obviously flipped on its head, although many of us may wonder what we get in return for it. And so people are constantly saying, what do we do about this mess in Washington? And I say, turn off the TV and go to your local school board meeting and go find out who your state senator and representative is and get involved in your local area and pull back some of that power from Washington because you're going to have a lot more ability to influence what happens right here and in things that matter most to your day-to-day life than you are the bozos out there.
Yeah, and we've tried to share with you, and this will be represented in my presentation, this is a remarkable community. Not only do Dan and I and the Cal Lutheran just love the community, it's been a remarkable few years. And we talked about that. That was a theme at last year's event, how this county did so many things right during the pandemic, even with all of the constraints put on it by the state. And today we're going to continue to highlight just what that has meant. And so this is our strength right here.
Can I also say, it's
Yeah.
been reassuring, it's fun to come here because, you know, if I were just listening to our editorial board meetings that we have every week, you know, we talk so negatively about California all the time. I was like, almost like maybe I shouldn't go there. Maybe I'll get like infected with like, like liberalism or something. And anyway, so it's like really neat to see, and I know, you know, but it's really neat to see such a kind of common sense group of people. It's fun.
Awesome.
It restores my faith in California.
Awesome. So there are a couple microphones that we have. There'll be one in each aisle. If you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. And we have time for a couple questions.
Thank you for being here. My name is Kevin McNamee, Mayor of Thousand Oaks. My greatest challenge as a council member and mayor is our navigating the edicts from Sacramento. They love telling us how to run our city when we know best how to serve the people. They're looking for solutions to problems they created that address the issues, for example, of large cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Jose, San Diego, but do not apply to medium and small-sized cities. So it's one thing for me to say, I want to say no to Sacramento. On the other hand, they control the purse strings. Do you have any thoughts on how to address that issue so we can better serve our people here?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. I mean, I think the first thing is, you know, simply to look at the people that represent your area here and try to get some of the other counties in, and I know there are others in California, to start making a real fuss about this. In terms of how money is allocated. And I know it's tough, but I mean, California, Sacramento, like Iron Triangle, it's such a scary place. I hate to say this, but I'm not quite sure how to fix your politics here. And I know that sounds awful, but like, I mean, haven't people been trying that for like a while? So I think it's gonna take people to rise up and change, you know, the direction of the people they elect. I'm not suggesting that they're not going to vote for Democrats, but maybe there needs to be different types of people who are running, who are making some of these cases.
Yeah, and I would say that our obviously our leadership here locally is a brand above, and I even mean at the state level. And so I think, again, there's a lot to build on right here.
And by the way, good for you too, because like when I talk about state and local is a key aspect of that. You know, up where I live, like there's a lot of autonomy for the localities because they also chafe at the notion of the state telling them what to do.
Hi there, I'm Rosemary Allison. My question actually goes back to Washington. And what it is we're seeing the news right now, and honestly, we've been watching so much dysfunction with our political leaders there. Mm-hmm. And I'm very concerned with what we're seeing in the world arena with China and the Ukraine. And I'm concerned about whether or not you feel they can pull together and at least avoid something that's going to be a world, situation.
I have to admit, I'm very concerned about this. Look, to me, when Russia invaded in Ukraine, it was the starting point of a big change, okay? It was the beginning of a new world disorder. And if you think about it, we lived through the end of the Soviet Union, and then we essentially had a peace dividend for a long time. And now we're seeing the end of that and a brand new situation. And what really concerned me, too, was that after that invasion, the president went and gave a State of the Union, and I was expecting him, the entire State of the Union, to be like, okay, the world has changed. And here's what America is going to do to be prepared to operate in this new world. And instead, it was like three little, he talked about Ukraine, but there was no mention of America's strategic threats, of what this means. So I'm very concerned about it because I don't think that our current leadership is viewing it in that lens, when it's so clear that that is what's going on. We now have the news that China is suggesting it might arm Russia. Russia today says it's pulling out of the START treaty. Although I did kind of laugh at that, the notion that Russia ever complied with START in the first place, kind of funny. Russia says it's no longer to do the thing it was no longer doing. But yes, it's alarming. And so I'm really curious to watch the next Republican primary turnout and see that debate. Although I have to admit, I'm a bit alarmed that some of the front runners in that are taking the attitude, oh, no more blank checks. And that's just, that's ignoring the problem in the same way. I don't know how many of you know this, but I think China has 350 naval ships. We have 278. And we are falling more behind. Our military, we're spending 3% of GDP. That is some of the lowest amounts we have ever spent in our life. And given Washington's inability to cut back any other spending, we are further crowding out the possibility of growth in defense budgets. So we have a lot of huge strategic challenges to face, and let's hope we get a leader that recognizes that.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
My name is Betsy Chess. Stand here. You mentioned local school boards. We see just in our area that they are more and more involved in the culture wars. Is this a positive thing in terms of getting involved locally, or is just another example of extreme partisanship?
So I think the fact that the school boards initially stepped into culture wars is a bad thing. I think the good thing is that the pandemic allowed every American to see some of the stuff that was coming through classrooms and woke them up to that. And I don't know exactly what's happening here in California, but I can tell you in states across the country, there have been a revolution in school boards via elections. Entire school boards have been kicked out. Control has been turned over to parents who ran for those school boards. In Florida, some of their biggest school districts have been entirely replaced by people who were critical of this cultural indoctrination. But you're seeing it too in Iowa, in Texas, in states all across the country. It was a major issue in the 2022 elections, and there's a couple of groups that are really big into this. Mothers Defending Freedom is one. But there are outfits out there now that are actually running boot camps, training up parents to make runs for school boards and try to change the direction. So this is a source of enormous sort of grassroots interest at the moment. I think it was behind Glenn Youngkin's victory in Virginia 2 years ago too. So there's a lot of enthusiasm out there to change it. So while I agree that I don't love the idea that school boards wandered into this in the first place, I do think it has at least woken people up.
Let me just stand. I'm Link Levins, and I'm a farmer here in Ventura County. We still have a few. I am just aghast at what happened in Hong Kong, and I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are on Taiwan.
Yeah, I think it's so tragic what happened in Hong Kong. It was such a clear violation what China did in terms of the agreements it had made going forward about Hong Kong's sovereignty, in terms of the tactics that were used against protesters, in terms of the weakness of the response of Western countries to what happened, and the fact that it's largely been forgotten. Right now, the trial of Jimmy Lai, who is one of the main publishers there, he could go to jail for life simply for having run a newspaper publication that is critical now of the CCP, has been critical of the CCP. It's appalling. I really think it's going to be important that the president at some point, instead of bumbling through sort of statements about whether or not the strategy of strategic ambiguity continues to exist or not with Taiwan, at some times he has come out and said, oh, we're going to defend Taiwan, and then his administration says, like, oh, nothing's changed, like we haven't changed our minds, and then he does it again. They need to come up with an answer for how they feel, and they need to let China know that, okay? And obviously things are becoming more hostile. I am very concerned. I understand that many Americans are wary about our support for Ukraine, but if Putin wins this, it's a sign to China that there's no reason why not to go in. And I really think that they're watching this closely, and it may be in part behind their decision to consider aiding Russia. Because they don't want to see a Ukraine victory, because they know that that would suggest the global community is largely united and would do something if they tried to invade Taiwan. So I think the stakes are huge in Ukraine, and people don't always realize that. Another interesting aspect of this is, Biden often talks about this in terms of democracy. I wish he would talk about it a little bit more in terms of American national interest. Do you know that Russia's military capacity has been reduced by half in the last year? Half of its, all of its armored equipment is gone. It's remarkable. So one of our greatest adversaries, because of Ukraine fighters, Ukraine people, yes, our money, but one of our greatest adversaries, military power, has essentially been halved, at least its conventional military power. We need, that's not a bad thing.
So as we wrap up, one last question I had is, I've shared with you already that Dan Hamilton, my colleague here at the center, and I, we sort of feel like the Wall Street Journal is essential reading, and every day we read the front page and we read the editorial page. And by doing that, you get this broad cross-section of views about what's news, how we should think about the news. And I've also really appreciated in the editorial page, someone who's not a Republican, that there's a diversity of viewpoints. There are often, columns or opinion pieces written by by Sanders or by Biden. And so sort of just describe a little bit, what's the culture like there, and how have you maintained sort of this amicability where we can hold very strong opinions, we can disagree, but do so respectfully?
Well, first of all, I mean, the Wall Street Journal editorial board is like the best place to work. Yeah. I worked at the Journal now for almost 30 years. I've worked at the editorial page for most of that time. It's hilarious. My kids actually give me grief on this. They tell me I need to leverage myself. I don't even know what that means. I'm like, well, where do you suggest I go? Like the New York Times? I mean, they'll like me a lot, right? So it's a great place to work. And one of the things that's awesome about it is that we don't kind of make up decisions ad hoc. We have a motto that we're guided by: free markets and free people. It used to be free markets and free men, but then folks like me started to work there, so we had to switch it up a little bit. And one thing that's really nice about that is that it's not like we're like, when Democrats do this, we don't like it, but when Republicans do the same thing, we do like it. Yeah. Instead, we put it all through free markets and free people, and then we don't care what party does it, right? I always laugh because people sometimes accuse us of being like a pro-Republican page. I have written more editorials critical of Republicans in my lifetime there for failing to follow the principles that they claim to support than I have Democrats, okay? I mean, that's one wonderful thing about it. The other thing that's wonderful is it's a reported editorial page, and so I spend more time on the phone talking to smart people like you who know more about what they're about than I do, so that I can inform readers. Now, the goal behind all that is to persuade. Yeah. And I love that word. I am not in the business of picking on people or demeaning them or criticizing them. I'm in the business of trying to make a good argument for people for why they might want to see things a certain way, based on the notion of free markets and free people. Yeah. And so one thing, if you ever read the page, you'll find out we're not like lambasting folks and whipping people into rages. It's really about providing facts, marshaling an argument, and getting people to listen. And the crew there, we're not all the Borg, we disagree on some things, especially some cultural issues. There's some real variety. Some of us are very libertarian and others are not. So that kind of, it makes for some interesting discussions. But one thing that's great is usually we can all settle on something because of free markets and free people.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And obviously, it's always been tremendously thought-provoking for Dan and myself and the team. And so that's why I'd like everyone to please join me in very warmly thanking Kimberley Strassel for joining us. Thank you very much.